I found out about my wife's affair from her lover's wife, and then we decided to take revenge on both of them. My name is Jack Harris, and I used to believe my life was predictable, ordinary even. I had a stable job, a decent house, and a wife I thought I knew inside and out. Laura and I had been together for 8 years, and while marriage had its ups and downs, I always believed we were in it for the long haul. That's what marriage is, right? Two people sticking together no matter what. I thought we were on the same page about that. But as the years went by, I started noticing small changes in Laura, things I couldn't quite put my finger on at the time. She became more distant, her smile no longer reaching her eyes the way it used to. She'd spend more time at work, or so she said, and when she came home, there was this strange tension between us, like she was keeping something from me. Still, I chalked it up to the stresses of life, to work, to routine. Maybe we were just in a rough patch, something every couple goes through. Then one evening, as I was winding down from a long day at work, I got a message. It was late, almost too late for a text that wasn't an emergency. The name on my phone was unfamiliar, Carol Wilson. The message, however, was anything but forgettable. Jack, I don't know how to say this, but I believe your wife is cheating on you with my husband. Carol didn't waste time. She told me that her husband, Chad, was a truck driver who frequently stopped at the diner where Laura worked. It all started when Chad made a technical mistake, a small but costly one. He had added his wife's iPad to his account and forgot that every message he sent or received could be seen on it. Carol wasn't snooping. She just happened to stumble upon the evidence one day. There, in plain sight, were messages between Chad and a woman he was seeing. That woman was Laura, my Laura. It was like a punch to the gut. All at once, the small oddities in Laura's behavior came rushing back to me. The late nights, the vague excuses, the way she avoided my eyes when I asked how her day had gone. It was all connected to this. Carol explained that she didn't act immediately. She wanted to be sure, to know who the woman was before confronting Chad. Over the course of a week, she did her own investigating, piecing together details from the messages until she finally learned the woman's name. Laura Harris, my wife. When Carol messaged me that night, she wasn't just venting. She was offering proof. She asked if we could meet in person, and though I was hesitant at first, I agreed. I had to know the truth, no matter how much it hurt. We met at a quiet cafe on the edge of town. It was a strange kind of meeting, two strangers thrown together by the betrayal of the people we loved. Carol looked exhausted, her eyes rimmed with red, as if she hadn't slept in days. She pulled out her iPad and showed me the messages. Messages I didn't want to see, but couldn't tear my eyes away from. There it was. The truth in cold, hard words. Flirty, secretive conversations between my wife and Chad. Exchanges filled with inside jokes, intimate details, plans to meet. There was no denying it. Laura was having an affair. Sitting across from Carol, my mind was a storm of emotions. Anger, disbelief, sadness, humiliation. But mostly, I felt numb, like a switch had flipped inside me, shutting down everything I thought I felt. Laura had been my partner, my best friend, the person I trusted most. And now, all of that was gone, shattered by a few careless words on a screen. Carol and I sat there in silence for a while, both of us trying to process what we had just confirmed. I had always imagined that if I ever found out Laura was cheating, I would explode in rage, confront her immediately, and demand answers. But in that moment, I didn't want to do any of that. Something else took over. Something colder, more calculated. As Carol and I continued to talk, we both realized divorce wasn't enough. Not yet. Our partners had gone behind our backs, betrayed us, and laughed about it in private. We couldn't just let them off that easily. No, we needed to make them feel a fraction of the pain they had caused us. We didn't know exactly what that would look like, but one thing was clear. Laura and Chad weren't going to get away with this. As Carol and I continued to talk, we both realized divorce wasn't enough. Not yet. Our partners had gone behind our backs, betrayed us, and laughed about it in private. We couldn't just let them off that easily. No, we needed to make them feel a fraction of the pain they had caused us. We didn't know exactly what that would look like, but one thing was clear. Laura and Chad weren't going to get away with this. After my meeting with Carol, I drove home in a daze, replaying the conversation over and over in my mind. Her words, the messages on that iPad, they were all so vivid, so real. I had suspected something was wrong for months, but seeing the evidence laid out so plainly, it changed everything. The drive felt like it took hours, though it couldn't have been more than 20 minutes. My thoughts were a storm of confusion, anger, and the painful reality that my marriage had been nothing more than an illusion. When I pulled into the driveway, the house seemed different, like it didn't belong to me anymore. This was the home Laura and I had built together. Every memory we had was tied to this place. The nights we'd spend on the couch watching old movies, the dinners where we'd laugh about nothing and everything. And now all I could think about was her betrayal. Laura wasn't home yet, which was just as well. I didn't know what I'd say to her if she walked through the door right then. The idea of confronting her filled me with dread. But part of me knew I wasn't ready to face her. Not yet. I needed time to process everything, to figure out how I was going to deal with it. I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at my phone, my mind wandering. I wondered how long it had been going on. How many times had she lied to me? How often had she smiled at me with those same lips that whispered secrets to another man? It was maddening. My thoughts spiraled deeper until I realized I needed to do something, anything, to break the cycle of anger and pain racing through me. The sound of the front door opening snapped me out of my thoughts. Laura was home. She stepped inside, tossing her purse onto the counter like she always did, not realizing that everything had changed in my world. "Hey, how was your day?" she asked casually, her voice as familiar as ever. But now, all I could hear was the lie behind every word. "Fine," I replied, my voice steady, careful not to reveal the whirlwind of emotions brewing inside me. I watched her closely as she moved around the kitchen, fixing herself a snack, acting like everything was normal. Did she even feel guilty? Did she think I was so clueless that I would never notice? My heart raced, but I forced myself to stay calm. Now wasn't the time for confrontation. Not yet. Over the next few days, I found myself studying her every move, looking for signs that would confirm what I already knew. And they were all there. Things I had once dismissed as unimportant were now glaring red flags. The way she'd glance at her phone and smile at a message she didn't share with me. The sudden work shifts that kept her out later than usual. And the way she avoided looking me in the eye whenever I asked her about her day. It was as if I were living with a stranger. At night, when she'd fall asleep beside me, I'd lie awake, thinking about Chad. What did he have that I didn't? Why him? I imagined them together, laughing at how easy it had been to fool me. The thought made my blood boil. But rather than act on impulse, I focused on something else: revenge. Carol and I kept in touch, talking nearly every day. We were both in the same boat, hurt by the people we trusted most, and it felt like we were the only two who understood what the other was going through. The more we spoke, the clearer our plan became. We wouldn't just sit back and let Laura and Chad get away with it. They needed to feel the same sense of betrayal, the same pain that had consumed us since we found out the truth. The idea of pretending to be in a relationship with Carol came up during one of our late-night phone calls. At first, it seemed ridiculous, but the more we talked about it, the more it made sense. If Laura and Chad thought we had moved on, if they believed we were happy without them, maybe it would rattle them. Maybe it would tear apart whatever fantasy world they had built together. We didn't need to go overboard, just enough to plant the seeds of doubt. It was a subtle form of payback, but it was the perfect starting point. And so, we agreed to meet again, this time with a purpose. We would stage a scene, something they couldn't ignore, something that would make them wonder if they had really won after all. A few days after Carol and I agreed on our plan, we arranged to meet again. This time, it wasn't for a painful discussion about our unfaithful spouses, but to set the wheels of our revenge in motion. The plan was simple: make Laura and Chad believe we were moving on together. If they thought we were building something without them, maybe it would make them question everything. Maybe it would bring their affair crashing down, just like they had done to our marriages. We decided on a motel just outside of town. It was the same one Laura and Chad had been using for their secret rendezvous. The irony wasn't lost on me. It felt fitting, poetic even, that we would turn the very place of their betrayal into a stage for our own game. Carol and I didn't have to do much, just make sure we were seen. The day of our little act arrived quickly, and as I drove to the motel, my heart pounded. It wasn't nerves exactly, it was more like anticipation. For the first time in weeks, I felt a strange sense of control, like I was finally taking back some of the power that Laura and Chad had stolen from me. Carol was already waiting when I arrived. She was leaning against her car, arms crossed, eyes scanning the parking lot. When she saw me pull up, she offered a small, nervous smile. She looked different today, more confident, but there was still that hint of sadness in her eyes. I guess we both wore our pain in subtle ways now, masking it with the plans we had made. "You ready for this?" she asked, straightening up as I got out of the car. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. Inside, I was bracing myself for what was about to happen. We stood there for a moment, looking around, waiting for some sign that Laura and Chad were nearby. Carol had done her research. She knew their routine. They usually met here around this time, and from the way she talked, she had the place staked out like a professional detective. I couldn't help but admire her determination. And then, right on cue, I spotted them. Laura's car pulled into the parking lot, and I felt my stomach twist. I hadn't seen her with him before, hadn't seen the way she looked when she was with Chad. It was like seeing a different side of her, a version I didn't know existed. She laughed at something he said, and they walked toward the motel entrance, hand in hand, like they didn't have a care in the world. But that carefree moment didn't last long. I leaned in and kissed Carol. Not passionately, not like lovers, but enough to make it look convincing. Just as we had planned, I made sure it happened right as Laura looked our way. Her laughter stopped instantly, her face freezing in shock. She tried to pull away from Chad, but it was too late. She had seen us. The expression on her face was one I'd never forget. A mix of surprise, confusion, and something else, jealousy maybe? Whatever it was, it made my heart race in satisfaction. Laura ducked behind Chad, as if hiding from the truth of what she had just witnessed. She didn't know what to do. Her eyes flicked from me to Carol, and back again, before she hurried inside the motel, dragging Chad along with her. I could only imagine what must have been running through her mind. Did she wonder how long Carol and I had been together? Did she suspect that we knew about their affair? The satisfaction of that moment was bitter, but it was the first time since all of this began that I didn't feel powerless. After Laura and Chad disappeared inside, Carol and I pulled away from each other, both of us standing there a little stunned at how easy it had been. "Well, that was something," she said, exhaling deeply. "Yeah," I nodded, still watching the door where Laura and Chad had vanished. "You think it worked?" Carol gave a small, confident smirk. "Oh, it worked? Trust me." She looked like she'd seen a ghost. We stood in silence for a moment, letting the weight of what we had just done sink in. It wasn't over. This was just the beginning. But for the first time since finding out about the affair, I felt like we had struck back. Laura and Chad weren't the only ones playing games now. And by the look on Laura's face, she knew it. When I got home that evening, Laura was already there, pacing around the living room. Her face was pale, and the tension in the air was thick. She glanced at me, her eyes wide with something like panic, but she didn't say anything at first. It was as if she was waiting for me to bring it up, to confront her, to ask why she had been at the motel. But I didn't. I just walked past her and acted like nothing had happened. I kept my voice casual, vague, as if everything was perfectly normal. "How was your day?" she asked after a long, awkward silence. "Fine," I replied, repeating the same empty word I'd used so many times before. I could feel her watching me, searching my face for some sign that I knew, that I had seen her. But I gave her nothing. The power shift was almost palpable. Laura, the one who had been keeping secrets, was now the one on edge, unsure of what I knew and what I didn't. That night, she climbed into bed beside me, her movements tentative, like she was afraid to get too close. I could feel the tension in her, the unease. It was strange after everything she had done. Now she was the one walking on eggshells. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, knowing that this was just the first step. There was more to come, and I wasn't done yet. The next morning, I woke up early. I had barely slept, my mind racing with everything that had happened the day before. Laura was still asleep beside me, her breathing slow and steady, like she didn't have a care in the world. I watched her for a moment, trying to wrap my mind around how she could lie next to me every night while sneaking around behind my back. It made my skin crawl. I got out of bed quietly, not wanting to wake her. I needed time to think, to clear my head before the inevitable conversations or confrontations started. Downstairs, I made myself a cup of coffee, the routine helping to settle my thoughts. But even in those small moments of normalcy, I couldn't escape the fact that everything had changed. Laura came downstairs an hour later, her hair still a mess from sleep, looking more tired than I'd seen her in a while. I wondered if she'd been up all night worrying about what she saw the day before. Maybe now she knew what it felt like to live in uncertainty, to wonder what was really going on beneath the surface. "Morning," she mumbled, glancing at me nervously. "Morning," I replied, my tone calm but distant. I could see her watching me closely, waiting for me to say something, anything that might give away what I was thinking. But I didn't give her that satisfaction. I wasn't ready to let her off the hook, not yet. We went through the motions of our morning routine in silence, but the air between us was thick with unspoken tension. She kept glancing at me, probably wondering why I hadn't confronted her yet, why I wasn't raging about the affair. The truth was, I wanted her to suffer in that uncertainty. I wanted her to feel the same insecurity and doubt that I had been carrying for weeks. The guilt, the paranoia, let her choke on it for a while. After a few minutes, Laura broke the silence. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice tinged with forced casualness. She was trying too hard to sound normal, to pretend like nothing had happened. But I could see the cracks in her composure. She was nervous. I sipped my coffee, glancing at her over the rim of the mug. "Yeah, everything's fine," I answered, my voice even, betraying nothing. Her eyes searched my face, looking for clues, but I didn't give her any. It was almost satisfying to see her squirm, unsure of what I knew. She must have been dying to ask if I had seen her with Chad at the motel, but she didn't have the courage. Not yet. As the day wore on, Laura's behavior became more erratic. She was hovering around me, unusually affectionate, trying to engage me in small talk or casual touches, like she was desperate to reassure herself that everything was still fine between us. But it wasn't. Every time she reached for my hand, I felt nothing but cold detachment. The intimacy that had once come so naturally between us was now tainted, spoiled by her lies. That evening, Carol called. I stepped outside to take the call, not wanting Laura to overhear. The cool air hit my face as I leaned against the porch railing, still processing everything that had happened the day before. "Did you see her?" Carol asked, her voice steady, though I could sense a hint of curiosity. She had been just as invested in the outcome as I was. "Yeah," I said, glancing back toward the house. "She saw us. And how did she react?" I could hear the faint satisfaction in Carol's voice. Like me, she was looking for some small victory in all this, something to make the pain of our spouse's betrayal a little easier to swallow. "She tried to act like nothing happened," I replied, shaking my head. "But she's been acting strange ever since. She doesn't know what to do." Carol laughed, a low, bitter sound. "Chad's been weird too. He didn't say anything, but I can tell he's rattled. I think he's starting to realize that maybe they don't have the upper hand anymore." It was true. For weeks, Laura and Chad had been the ones holding the secrets, the lies, thinking they were in control. But now, the tables had turned. They were the ones scrambling to figure out what was going on, questioning whether their perfect little affair was as secret as they thought. "So, what's the next step?" I asked. The satisfaction of seeing Laura rattled was a start, but it wasn't enough. I wanted more. I needed more. Carol was quiet for a moment, thinking. "I think we need to push them further," she finally said. "We need to make them feel like they're losing control. Maybe we should let them see us again. Make it more obvious that we're together." I nodded, the plan taking shape in my mind. "Yeah, I think you're right. If they believe we're moving on, if they think we're happy without them, it'll start to unravel whatever illusion they've built together." We discussed the details for a while longer, going over how we could make our next move. It was strange planning this kind of elaborate deception, But then again, Laura and Chad had been lying to us for months. In a way, we were just giving them a taste of their own medicine. When I hung up, I stayed outside for a while, staring up at the darkening sky. The wind was cool, and for a moment, it felt like it was clearing the fog in my head. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming something that had been taken from me, my dignity, my sense of self-worth. When I walked back inside, Laura was sitting on the couch, flipping through channels on the TV, but not really watching anything. She looked up as I entered, her eyes lingering on me, trying to read my face. I could tell she wanted to ask where I had been, who I had been talking to, but she didn't. Not yet. I sat down beside her, acting as if everything was normal. The silence between us was unbearable, but I refused to be the one to break it. I wanted her to crack first. I wanted her to be the one drowning in her own guilt, just like I had been. Eventually, she couldn't take it anymore. "Jack," she said softly, turning toward me. "Is everything really okay? You've been distant." I looked at her, meeting her gaze for the first time all day. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her I knew everything, to throw the truth in her face. But instead, I smiled, a calm, cold smile that I knew would make her even more uncertain. "Everything's fine," I repeated, my voice steady. "Why wouldn't it be?" She stared at me, her eyes wide with confusion, maybe even fear. For the first time since I had found out about the affair, I felt like I was the one in control. And it felt good. The following days were a strange dance between Laura and me. She kept trying to act like nothing was wrong, but I could feel the unease radiating off her. It was in the way she moved around the house, hesitant, cautious, as if she was waiting for something to explode. She'd give me these nervous smiles, offer to cook dinner more often, or suggest we watch a movie together, all things she hadn't cared to do for months. I could tell she was trying to overcompensate, hoping her sudden attentiveness would distract me from whatever guilt she was feeling. And in a twisted way, it amused me. Every gesture, every kind word from her now felt hollow, insincere. She didn't know that I was already several steps ahead, that I was watching her closely while quietly working with Carol on the next phase of our plan. Laura was already crumbling under the weight of her own lies. She just didn't know it yet. One evening, after another awkward dinner, Laura brought up something she hadn't mentioned in a long time. "You know, I've been thinking," she began, her voice casual, but I could hear the tension underneath. "We haven't taken a trip together in ages. Maybe we should, go away for a weekend or something. Just the two of us. Get away from everything." I almost laughed at the irony. Her sudden desire to reconnect came just as her affair was unraveling. I couldn't tell if she was trying to distract me or herself. But either way, it was clear that she was desperate to salvage whatever was left of our marriage. "That sounds nice," I said, keeping my voice calm and neutral, like I wasn't already planning something entirely different behind her back. "Maybe we should?" Her face lit up, as if she had taken my agreement as a sign that things were going to be okay. But I knew better. A weekend getaway wasn't going to fix what she had broken, and deep down, I think she knew that too. Later that night, I stepped outside to call Carol again. I didn't want Laura overhearing anything. Carol picked up on the first ring, as if she had been waiting for my call. "Hey, any updates?" she asked, her voice steady but laced with a hint of excitement. We were both getting deeper into this now, and I could tell she was just as invested as I was. "She's losing it," I said, walking down the driveway to make sure I was out of earshot. "She wants to take a trip, like some kind of desperate attempt to reconnect." Carol snorted. "Let me guess, Chad's been acting weird too. He's quieter than usual, doesn't talk about anything personal anymore. It's like he's trying to convince me that everything's fine, but I can see right through him." The satisfaction in her voice was palpable. We were both starting to see the cracks forming in their perfect little affair. It was unraveling, and they were scrambling to patch it up. "So, what's next?" I asked, my voice low. "We need to push this further. Make sure they're really feeling the pressure." Carol paused, thinking. "I've been thinking about that. I know Chad is meeting Laura again in a couple of days. Same motel. If we show up there again, but make it even more obvious this time, I think that might push them over the edge." She was right. The last time had been subtle enough to plant doubt, but this time, we needed to make sure they couldn't ignore it. Yeah, I agreed. But we need to be smart about it. We can't just rely on being seen. We need to make them think we're moving on without them. Completely. What do you have in mind? She asked, intrigued. I took a deep breath, the next part of the plan forming in my mind. We should book a room at the same motel. Not just kiss at the entrance like last time, but let them see us leaving the motel together like we've been staying there. They need to see that whatever they had is falling apart, that we're already ahead of them. Carol was quiet for a moment, and then I heard her laugh softly. That's actually brilliant. It'll drive them crazy. Chad will lose it. We need to make sure they see us, I continued. Not just a passing glance. They need to feel like we've taken control, that their affair was just a blip, and now we're the ones moving on. The plan felt solid, and Carol agreed. We arranged the details and decided to meet at the motel in a couple of days, right when we knew Chad and Laura would be there. This time, we wouldn't just be background characters in their little drama. We were about to take center stage. The night before our planned rendezvous, I could feel the tension building in the house. Laura was quieter than usual, as if she was waiting for me to confront her. She knew something was wrong, but didn't have the courage to come clean. Maybe she was hoping I didn't know about Chad, or maybe she thought she could repair the damage before it was too late. But she was wrong. The next morning, as she got ready for work, I watched her carefully. I knew where she was really going. Back to Chad, back to their pathetic little secret. It was almost funny how predictable it had all become. Have a good day, I said as she kissed me on the cheek, her lips lingering a little longer than usual, like she was testing to see if I still cared. I gave her a small smile, my heart pounding, knowing that in just a few hours, she'd be in for a surprise she wouldn't forget. Thanks, she said softly, her eyes searching mine. She wanted reassurance, but I gave her none. Once she left, I grabbed my keys and headed out to meet Carol at the motel. Today, everything was going to change. The drive to the motel felt different this time, more intense, more final. The first time Carol and I had met there, it had been a test, a tentative move to see how Laura and Chad would react. But today, we were going all in. This was no longer just about making them jealous. It was about taking control of the situation and letting them know that their games were over. As I pulled into the parking lot, I saw Carol waiting near the entrance, her car parked in the same spot as last time. She was dressed more casually today, but there was a confident edge to her that hadn't been there before. We had both changed since discovering our spouse's affair. There was a sharpness in our resolve now, a determination that came from knowing we weren't just victims in this mess anymore. I got out of the car, and Carol approached me with a determined smile. "You ready for this?" she asked, her voice steady but carrying the weight of what we were about to do. I nodded, feeling the same mix of excitement and nerves that I'd had the last time, only stronger now. "Yeah, let's do it." We had rented a room at the motel this time, a small, nondescript room that was nothing special, but it served its purpose. We didn't need luxury. We needed visibility. As we walked toward the door, I noticed Chad's truck parked near the back of the lot, and my heart raced. Laura was here. I could feel it. Once inside, Carol and I sat down on the bed, not bothering to make ourselves comfortable. This wasn't about actually spending time together. It was about setting the stage, making it look like we had already moved on. "We'll give it an hour or so," Carol said, glancing at her watch. "They should be coming out soon. We need to time this perfectly." I leaned back against the wall, my thoughts drifting to Laura. I wondered if she had any idea what was coming, if she felt even a shred of guilt while she was with Chad. Somehow I doubted it. People like her and Chad, they never thought they'd get caught. They never thought the lies would catch up with them. The hour passed slowly, every minute stretching as Carol and I waited for the right moment. We didn't talk much. Both of us focused on what we were about to do. Finally, Carol checked her phone and stood up, her movements quick and deliberate. "They're leaving," she said, peeking out the window. "It's time." I followed her to the door, my heart pounding with anticipation. We walked out into the sunlight, the bright afternoon catching us both as we stepped into view. I could see them. Laura and Chad were just coming out of their room, and the sight of them together sent a wave of anger through me. But I kept my cool, knowing that this was our moment to flip the script. Carol took my hand, a gesture that was more symbolic than anything else, but it was enough. We walked across the parking lot, making sure we were directly in their line of sight. I didn't need to look directly at Laura to know she had seen us. I could feel her eyes on me, feel the shock and confusion radiating from her. Chad's face was a different story. His smug expression faded as he saw Carol and me together. And for a moment, I thought I saw a panic flash in his eyes. We didn't stop. We walked right past them, hand in hand, heading toward my car. The entire encounter couldn't have lasted more than a few seconds, but it was enough. As we approached the car, I leaned in and kissed Carol on the cheek, making it as visible as possible. It wasn't a romantic gesture, but it served its purpose. It shattered whatever illusion Laura and Chad had built around their affair. As we got into my car, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Laura and Chad were still standing there, frozen in place, like they didn't know what to do next. The shock on Laura's face was clear even from a distance. She was caught, and there was no escaping it now. I started the engine, the rumble of the car breaking the silence as we pulled out of the lot. "Did you see their faces?" Carol asked, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. "They didn't know what hit them." I nodded, gripping the steering wheel tightly. "Yeah, they're starting to realize that they're not in control anymore." For the rest of the drive, we didn't talk much, but the tension between us had eased. It wasn't over yet, far from it, but the power had shifted. Laura and Chad were no longer the ones in control of the narrative. We were, and they were beginning to understand that their actions had consequences. When I got home that evening, Laura wasn't there yet. I didn't know if she was avoiding me, trying to buy herself more time to come up with an excuse, or she had stayed with Chad longer than usual. But it didn't matter. I had no intention of confronting her directly. Not yet. This wasn't about her confessing or begging for forgiveness. This was about making her feel the weight of her choices, just as I had felt mine. Later that night, Laura finally came home. She walked in quietly, her eyes darting around the room as if she were expecting something. Maybe a fight, maybe an accusation. But I stayed silent, sitting on the couch, pretending to read something on my phone. She stood there for a moment, hesitating before finally speaking. "Hey, sorry I'm late. Work was, crazy today. I didn't even look up." "No problem," I said calmly, flipping to the next page of the article I wasn't actually reading. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Laura shifted uncomfortably, probably wondering why I wasn't reacting, why I wasn't confronting her after what she had seen at the motel. But that was the point. I wanted her to sit with it, to let the guilt and paranoia eat at her from the inside out. "I'm going to bed," she mumbled after a while, her voice small and uncertain. "Good night," I replied, still not looking up. As she disappeared up the stairs, I finally let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The plan was working. She was unraveling, piece by piece, and I was just getting started. The next morning, I felt a strange calm as I went through my routine. It was the kind of calm that settles in when you know you're in control, that your next move is going to hit exactly where it needs to. Laura had been quiet since last night, too quiet. She was slipping, and I could tell she was still processing what she had seen at the motel. But this wasn't the time to back off. No, this was the moment to press harder. Carol and I had already laid the groundwork, but it wasn't enough to simply make Laura and Chad uncomfortable. I wanted more. I wanted them to feel the full weight of what they had done to us. It wasn't just about making them jealous anymore. It was about turning their affair into the very thing that destroyed them. As I sipped my coffee that morning, an idea started to take shape. It was time to take things to the next level. Laura and Chad thought they could keep everything hidden, that their little affair was still in the dark. But I was going to bring their dirty secret into the light. I was going to expose them, and in doing so, I would burn down everything they had built together. That afternoon, I reached out to Carol again. We had been careful up to this point, keeping our moves subtle, but this time I needed her help with something bigger, something final. When she picked up the phone, her voice was steady, almost eager. "What's next?" she asked, not bothering with pleasantries. Carol was in this just as deep as I was now, and I knew she was just as ready to take things further. "I've been thinking," I began, choosing my words carefully. "We need to blow this whole thing wide open. No more playing around." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then Carol spoke, her voice low but determined. "I'm listening." "We need to expose them," I said, leaning forward, my heart pounding as the plan solidified in my mind. Publicly, they've been playing us for fools, laughing behind our backs. It's time everyone knows who they really are. How? Carol asked, her tone serious. What's the plan? I've been thinking about this for a while. Laura and Chad had built their entire affair on secrecy, on the belief that no one would ever find out. But if that secrecy were stripped away, if their dirty little affair became public knowledge, it would destroy everything. I wanted to hit them where it hurt the most. Their reputations, their lives, their relationships with the people they cared about. And I knew just how to do it. They've been meeting at the same motel for months, I began. We both know when and where. All we need to do is catch them in the act. Photos, videos, something undeniable. We'll show the world exactly what kind of people they are. Carol was quiet for a moment, considering the plan. Then she spoke, her voice filled with a dark kind of resolve. I know just the person. A private investigator. He's discreet, and he'll get us exactly what we need. We'll have the proof in no time. It was perfect. We didn't need to confront them directly. We just needed the evidence. Once we had it, we could send it to everyone who mattered, friends, family, even Chad's workplace. There would be no coming back from it. They would be humiliated, their little affair exposed for all to see. We agreed to meet later that week to finalize the details. In the meantime, I kept things cool at home. Laura had no idea what was coming, and I made sure to keep it that way. I let her think that maybe I hadn't seen her at the motel, that I was still in the dark about everything. She was trying harder now, cooking more meals, being overly affectionate, even suggesting we spend more time together. It was almost pathetic how transparent her efforts were. But I played along, keeping the same calm, detached demeanor that had been driving her crazy for days. I could tell the guilt was eating away at her. She was waiting for the other shoe to drop, but she had no idea that the storm coming was much bigger than she could ever imagine. The day of the meeting came quickly. Carol and I met the private investigator at a small, out-of-the-way cafe. He was a grizzled, no-nonsense guy who had clearly been doing this kind of work for years. After a brief introduction, we got straight to business. I need you to follow two people, Carol said, sliding a photo of Chad across the table. They've been meeting at a motel for a while now. We need pictures, videos, whatever you can get. We want solid proof. The investigator glanced at the photo, then nodded. I'll need to know the time and location. But yeah, I can get you what you need. Carol gave him the details, and within minutes, everything was set. It was surprisingly easy, but then again, Chad and Laura weren't exactly being cautious anymore. They thought they had everything under control, but that illusion was about to be shattered. As we left the cafe, I felt a strange sense of anticipation. In just a few days, I would have everything I needed to destroy Laura's world. She had taken everything from me, my trust, my love, my marriage. Now, it was my turn to take something from her. Carol and I didn't say much as we parted ways, but there was a mutual understanding between us. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming our lives, about making sure Laura and Chad couldn't walk away from this unscathed. When I got home that evening, Laura was already there, sitting on the couch with a glass of wine in her hand. She looked up when I walked in, her eyes filled with uncertainty. She still hadn't asked about the motel, still hadn't confronted me about what she'd seen. I wondered if she was hoping I'd never bring it up, that it would somehow disappear. But that wasn't going to happen. Hey, she said softly, her voice wavering. I was thinking maybe we could take that trip I mentioned, just the two of us. It could be good for us. I smiled at her, a calm, cold smile that made her visibly uncomfortable. Yeah, maybe. We'll see. Her face fell slightly, and I could see the fear creeping in. She didn't know what was coming, but she could feel it. The walls were closing in, and soon, there would be nowhere left for her to hide. The days leading up to our next moved past in slow, agonizing anticipation. Each morning I'd wake up beside Laura, pretending everything was fine, knowing that soon her world would come crashing down. She had no idea what was coming, and I played my part perfectly, calm, indifferent, detached. The more I acted as though everything was normal, the more anxious she became. It was like watching a spider weave its web, only to see its prey slowly get tangled and stuck, with no idea what awaited it. Carol and I kept in close contact, making sure everything was in place. The private investigator had agreed to stake out the motel, and the plan was simple: get undeniable evidence of Chad and Laura's affair, and then use it to blow up their lives. Once we had the photos and videos, there would be no more hiding, no more pretending. Everyone would know the truth. 2 days later, the investigator called. "I've got what you need," he said, his voice steady and professional. "Clear photos, timestamps, everything. They were at the motel together this afternoon. I'll send over the files tonight." It was exactly what I had been waiting for. I thanked him and hung up, my heart racing. This was it, the moment I had been working toward. Everything was in place, and soon, Laura's lies would be exposed. I wondered how she would react, how she would try to explain herself once the truth was out in the open. But honestly, I didn't care. There was nothing she could say that would change anything. That evening, after I received the email from the investigator, I sat alone in my office, opening the files one by one. The photos were crystal clear: Laura and Chad, laughing together outside the motel, holding hands, walking into the room. There was no mistaking what was going on between them. It was all laid out in black and white, undeniable. As I scrolled through the photos, a strange feeling washed over me. Not the anger or heartbreak I had expected, but something colder. Satisfaction. Seeing the proof of their betrayal didn't hurt anymore. It felt like validation, a confirmation of everything I had already known. And now, I had the power to bring it all crashing down. I called Carol, and when she answered, I could hear the tension in her voice. "Did you get them?" she asked, not bothering with small talk. "I did," I replied, my voice steady. "It's all there. They're done." Carol let out a long breath, the weight of everything hitting her. "Good. I've already got a plan for what to do with the photos. We need to make sure it hits hard. Send them to everyone who matters. Friends, family, maybe even Chad's work. We'll leave no stone unturned." I nodded, though she couldn't see me. "Yeah, let's make sure it's public. I want them to feel it." We spent the next hour discussing how to roll out the evidence. It had to be carefully timed, carefully planned. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about making sure they couldn't wriggle out of this, that there would be no room for excuses or lies. By the time we were finished, everything was in place. Tomorrow, the photos would go out, and Laura's carefully constructed life would collapse. The next morning, I woke up early, the weight of what I was about to do sitting heavily in my chest. But it wasn't guilt or hesitation. It was anticipation. I went through the motions of my day, knowing that in just a few hours, everything would change. Laura was acting unusually sweet again, like she was trying to fix something she couldn't even name. She didn't know that it was already too late. Later that day, I received a message from Carol. "It's done." I took a deep breath and opened my email. Sure enough, there it was, the evidence sent to every important person in Laura and Chad's lives. Her friends, her family, her coworkers, everyone knew. Chad's wife, Carol, had made sure to hit him where it hurt too, sending the photos to his workplace, ensuring that there would be professional fallout as well. I sat back, staring at the screen, imagining the chaos that must have been erupting in Laura's world. The betrayal, the lies, everything was now out in the open, laid bare for everyone to see. There would be no running from this. When Laura came home that evening, she was a wreck. Her face was pale, her hands trembling as she walked into the house. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there, staring at me like a deer caught in the headlights. I knew what was coming. "Jack," she began, her voice shaking. "I need to talk to you." I looked up from the book I was pretending to read, keeping my face calm, giving nothing away. "What's wrong?" She swallowed hard, her eyes darting around the room, as if she were searching for an escape. I don't know how to say this, but she hesitated, her voice breaking. "I think someone's trying to ruin us. Someone sent pictures of me with Chad." She said his name like it hurt her to even acknowledge it, and that gave me a twisted sense of satisfaction. I set the book down, leaning back in my chair, crossing my arms. "Oh," I asked, keeping my tone casual. "What kind of pictures?" Laura blinked, clearly not expecting me to be so calm. "Of us. At the motel. Someone must have followed us. They sent them to everyone." Her voice cracked. and I could see the panic building in her eyes. She was unraveling, trying to figure out how to fix something that couldn't be fixed. I watched her, my heart cold, my mind racing with how far I was willing to take this. For a moment, she just stood there, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. Then she started to cry, big, heaving sobs that racked her whole body. Part of me wanted to feel something, pity, maybe, or anger. But there was nothing, just a quiet, cold satisfaction. "I can explain," she cried, her voice desperate. It didn't mean anything, Jack. Please, you have to believe me." I stood up, staring at her as she crumbled in front of me. This was the moment she had been dreading, the moment where her lies finally caught up with her. And there was no going back now. "I already know, Laura," I said, my voice low, cutting through her sobs. "I've known for a while. The motel, the lies, Chad. I know everything." She stopped crying for a moment, staring at me in shock. You knew?" I nodded slowly. "I've known, and now, so does everyone else." Her face went pale, the reality of the situation hitting her all at once. "Jack, please. I can fix this. We can work through this." I shook my head, feeling a strange sense of finality wash over me. "No, Laura. We're done." And with that, I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, broken and alone. After I walked out of the room, I could still hear Laura sobbing quietly, her cries echoing down the hall. But I didn't stop. I didn't turn back. I had waited for this moment for so long, rehearsing in my head how it would feel when the truth finally shattered her world. And now that it had happened, I felt nothing but a cold sense of resolution. The part of me that once loved her had died the moment I saw the proof of her betrayal. I went upstairs, closing the door to the guest bedroom I had been sleeping in for the past few weeks. I could still hear Laura downstairs, her desperate pleas and broken sobs filling the house. It might have been heartbreaking once, but now it was just noise, background to the final act of our ruined marriage. She could cry all she wanted. It wouldn't change a thing. I sat on the bed, staring at my phone. A new message from Carol had just come through. "Looks like it's working. Chad came home early. Things are getting messy." I smirked, imagining Chad trying to explain himself to Carol, now that their dirty little affair had been exposed to the world. No more secrets, no more lies. His life was unraveling just like Laura's, and I couldn't help but feel a twisted satisfaction knowing that they were finally facing the consequences of what they had done. I wondered how Chad was handling it, if he was pleading for forgiveness, or if he was still trying to deny everything. Either way, it didn't matter. He was done. I texted Carol back. "Good. They deserve it." For a moment, I thought about what was next. Carol and I had planned this together, and now that the plan was in full motion, I felt the weight of it all crashing down. I wasn't sure what would happen next between us. We had been partners in this revenge, but beyond that, I didn't know where things stood. Maybe we would drift apart after this, our mission accomplished. Or maybe something more was growing between us, something real. But that was a question for another time. For now, we were both caught in the whirlwind we had created. Later that night, I went downstairs to find Laura sitting on the couch, her face pale and tear-streaked. She looked up at me as I entered the room, her eyes swollen from crying. "Jack, please," she said, her voice weak. "I know I've made mistakes, but we can still fix this. We can go to therapy, we can—" "No, Laura," I interrupted, my voice flat. "There's nothing to fix. It's over." She shook her head, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "You don't mean that. You can't just walk away after everything we've been through." I leaned against the wall, arms crossed, staring at her with cold detachment. "After everything we've been through? You mean after you lied to me? After you slept with Chad behind my back for months? You think we can just go back to the way things were?" Laura sobbed harder, her face crumpling with the weight of my words. But this time, her tears had no effect on me. I had seen too much, heard too many lies. The woman I had married, the one I had trusted, was long gone. The person sitting in front of me now was a stranger. "I can't lose you, Jack," she whispered. "Please don't do this. I love you." I let out a bitter laugh, the sound harsh in the silence of the room. "Love? You don't even know what that means, Laura. If you loved me, you wouldn't have done what you did. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. There was nothing left for her to say. She had been caught, exposed, and there was no excuse or apology that could undo the damage. We were beyond that now. I've already filed for divorce, I said quietly, watching as her face twisted in shock. The papers will be ready soon. You'll get everything. This house, everything inside it. I don't want any of it. I just want out. Her eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. Divorce? No. Jack, please don't do this. We can still. It's over, I said firmly, cutting her off. You can keep everything. I don't care anymore. Her sobs grew louder, but I turned away, heading toward the stairs again. As I reached the bottom step, she called after me, her voice desperate. Jack, don't leave me like this. Please. I need you. I made a mistake. It was just a fling. It didn't mean anything. I stopped in my tracks, turning to face her one last time. Maybe it didn't mean anything to you, but it destroyed everything for me. Her sobs filled the room again as I walked upstairs, closing the door behind me. I didn't feel like arguing anymore. There was nothing left to argue about. As I sat on the bed, I scrolled through my phone, looking at the messages that had been pouring in since the evidence went public. My friends were reaching out, people I hadn't spoken to in months, offering sympathy and support. A few of Laura's friends had messaged too. Some in shock, some apologetic, some angry. It was amazing how fast news spread, how quickly the reality of her betrayal had become everyone's business. And then there was the message I had been waiting for, from Emily, Chad's sister. She had been distant ever since our relationship ended, not fully understanding why things had gone south. But now, it seemed she had finally learned the truth. I saw what happened, her message read. I'm so sorry. I didn't know about Chad and your wife. If I had known, I never would have ended things between us. I stared at the screen for a long moment, my mind spinning. Emily had been the one bright spot after everything fell apart with Laura, but Chad had ruined that too. And now, maybe, there was a chance to make things right. I texted her back. It's not your fault. Chad and Laura, they're the ones to blame. I'd like to talk if you're open to it. She replied almost immediately. I'd like that too. I set the phone down, staring at the ceiling, wondering what the future would hold. Everything had been set in motion. Laura and Chad's lives were in ruins, just as I had planned. But as the dust settled, I found myself wondering what came next. I had spent so long plotting this revenge, thinking it would bring me closure, and in a way, it had. But there was also an emptiness left behind, a hollow space where my life with Laura had once been. The revenge had been satisfying, yes, but it wasn't the end of the story. Now I had to figure out what came next, how to rebuild my life from the wreckage she had left behind. The next few days were a whirlwind of chaos. Laura had lost everything, her friends, her reputation, and even her job. The photos had spread quickly, and she became a pariah overnight. Her phone constantly rang with calls from people demanding explanations or cutting ties altogether. It was hard to watch, but I felt no sympathy. She had created this mess. I filed for divorce the following week, handing her the papers in a cold, quiet exchange. Laura looked at me, eyes red and swollen, but she didn't argue. There was nothing left to say. The affair had destroyed everything between us. She signed the papers without a fight, knowing it was over. Meanwhile, Chad's life had spiraled out of control too. Carol had followed through with her side of the plan, and Chad's workplace found out about the affair. Rumors spread, and his marriage to Carol officially crumbled. Chad had lost not only his wife, but also his job, another casualty of his selfishness. But it was Emily's message that stuck with me the most. We met up soon after, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. Our conversations felt genuine, unburdened by lies or secrets. We talked for hours about everything, about what had happened, about our future, about moving forward from the destruction Chad and Laura had left behind. Laura moved out a few weeks later, taking what little remained of her dignity. The house felt empty without her, but it was a good kind of emptiness. I had no regrets. I watched her drive away, and for the first time in months, I felt free. It was time to rebuild. After Laura moved out, her life continued to unravel. The shame of the affair had followed her everywhere. Her friends had turned their backs, her family barely spoke to her, and the scandal had cost her job at the diner. She was forced to find a new place to live, but rumors about her infidelity had spread, and she was met with cold shoulders and judgmental stares wherever she went. I heard bits and pieces about her from mutual acquaintances. She was struggling, trying to rebuild her life, but no one wanted to give her a second chance. The affair had marked her, and now she was paying the price for her betrayal. Every relationship she had depended on had crumbled, and she found herself isolated and alone. Meanwhile, I was moving on. My conversations with Emily had grown into something real, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I had a future to look forward to. Laura's downfall wasn't my focus anymore. It was just the inevitable consequence of her choices. Laura had lost everything. The life she had tried to build on lies and deceit was gone, and there was no one left to save her from the wreckage. With Laura out of my life, the silence in the house felt different, no longer oppressive but peaceful. The divorce finalized quickly, without any drama. I had given her the house and most of the possessions, but I didn't care. What I had gained was far more valuable: my freedom. As for Chad, I heard from Carol that he had hit rock bottom. After losing his job and marriage, he had tried to repair things with his family, but they weren't interested. His reputation was shattered. Carol had moved on too, cutting all ties with him, and for the first time, she seemed truly at peace. Emily and I continued to grow closer. What had started as a painful connection through shared betrayal slowly evolved into something real, something hopeful. We both had scars from the past, but together, we were building something honest. No more secrets, no more lies. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine again. I had survived the worst of it, and now I was ready to move forward. As for Laura, her life remained in ruins. Occasionally, I'd hear about her from a mutual friend, still struggling, still alone. She was a shadow of the person she used to be. But I no longer felt anger or satisfaction when I thought of her. Just indifference. In the end, revenge had been satisfying, but what mattered most was what came after: a fresh start. And that's exactly what I intended to take.